Good afternoon, everybody. Today is another AP Computer Science A live day, I guess. Today is Thursday, and my name is Rob Schultz. I teach at Bellbrook High School in Bellbrook, Ohio.
And I'm Jill Westerlund from Hoover High School in Hoover, Alabama. We're so glad that you're with us. We are going to be going over the answers to yesterday's mock exam. We hope that you joined us for the mock. And if you didn't join us for the mock yesterday, even though you might hear the answers reviewed today, go back and do the mock in a timed scenario before you get ready or before you take your exam on the 15th.
Yep, remember it's practice, practice, practice.
That's right. We've got a couple of other things going on today. Not the most important is that I have made a mascot origami duck. Can you see it? I don't know if you can see it. I might show it to you later. I made it out of a JQR page. So I've put that in the Google Drive and I'll talk about that. We've been told, and I think it's great advice, that this duck should be named Gizmo. So we'll talk about that. And we've got a special friend joining us, someone that we all have lots to hear from.
But before we hear from her, we're going to go through the first question. We've got two questions. We'll go through the first question, and then we'll meet our special guest, and then we'll go through the second question and kind of wrap things up for the day. So today we're going to be scoring the two questions that were shared yesterday during the mock to practice for the 2020 exam. And again, we wanted to point out that Mrs. Westerlund and I came up with these questions designed to be similar in structure and format, hopefully, but not necessarily to be intended to be representative of the exact content that will be assessed. So we just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that, so there were no misconceptions that, hey, those weren't the specific skills that they went over on the mock exam. Okay, so we're looking at structure and format, just so that you're used to that part of it. Okay, so we're going to jump right in with the score info question, part A. Part A was a relatively large rubric. There were 6 points on part A and only 3 points on part B. So for part A, we have to compare a score value. We have to compare score with all of the appropriate entries in score list. We have to create a new score info object that contains our score. We're doing a lot of different things in here. We have to insert the object into a list. And we'll talk about that because, again, when you go through and look at the rubric and you look at the question, the change in font is specific. And notice with this point, there is no change in font. It just says specifically to insert an object into a list based on a comparison, versus the next point that says that we have to insert a new score info object into score list once and only once in maintaining numerical order and numeric sequence. So one of them is very specific, one of them is very general. We have to make sure that all of the score info objects in score list have the correct frequencies after they've been updated, and we have to correctly return a Boolean value based on whether or not a new score info object was added. And also notice, and we'll address this here again in just a minute, there was a 2-point penalty on this question. A specific 2-point penalty added to the rubric that if you add to score list inside a for each loop, and hopefully you're sitting there going, now that's ridiculous. Why would anybody do that? Mr. Schultz and Mrs. Westerlund already taught us that you should not be making updates to an array or an array list inside a for each loop. It's for access only. Okay, but if a student attempted to do that, that would automatically be a 2-point penalty as opposed to pulling more than 2 points off of the rubric. So we will address that a little bit as well. Okay, so here's the canonical solution for part A. I believe if you go out and look at the scoring guidelines for this question, they had a canonical and then an alternate canonical. And for time's sake, we are not going to address the alternate solution that's provided. Really, the big difference between the two is that this solution is done with a while loop. The alternate solution, if I remember correctly, was a for loop, and then the conditional statements were inside the for loop in such a way that everything worked the way it was supposed to. So if you get a chance, go out and check it. It's a different approach to the problem. It still hits all of the rubric points. But again, as we've said multiple times in the past, you don't have to have an exact match for the canonical to get full credit. And that's kind of a good example of that. So looking through the rubric, excuse me, here are our 7 points. I think I said 6 points before. Here are our 7 points. Do we compare score value with a value retrieved from the object in a list? And it says we must use get score. And in this case, we do. We go out to our score list, we get the object at index position K, we get its score, and then we compare it to the score that was passed in as the parameter. So we get the first point. Do we compare score, our parameter, with all appropriate entries of score list with no bounds errors, no exit early, or no infinite loop? And in this case, we do. We are prepared to go all the way to the end of score list if we need to using a while loop, but we're going to stop as soon as we find a point where the score that was passed in as the parameter is greater than the score that we get from the list. So when it says all appropriate entries, notice that there's a difference between that and saying that we compare it to all entries. We only want the ones that are appropriate. It could be the first 5, it could be the first 50, it could be the first 500, we don't know, but we have to make sure that we're comparing it to all of the appropriate entries of score list. Do we create a new score info object containing score? We do. Do we insert object? Do we insert an object into a list based on a comparison other than equality? We do. We actually have a place down here where we insert an object into a list based on comparison. And then this is where we check to make sure we're inserting the correct object into the correct list. Do we insert a new score info object into score list once and only once in maintaining numerical order? Well, again, that kind of ties in, and I should have put some extra underlines in here because in maintaining numerical order and numerical uniqueness, there's a lot more to that than just this one line. You know, we're making sure that we stop our loop and we get the right value of K when we find the position that our score belongs. We go through and we determine whether or not that score is already there. And if it's not, then we go ahead and add it in the correct location. But our rubric does do all of those things. Do all of the score info objects in score list have the correct frequencies after updates, if any? Yes, if we happen to find our score, then we increment it. We don't add it again. So we are incrementing the frequencies correctly and providing all of the updates. And then finally, do we correctly return a Boolean value based on whether a new score info object was added? And in this case, we do. If we go through and we determine that our score info object was found, then we increment it. Otherwise, we come down, add it, and at the very bottom, notice this is a little different because we've got that not symbol in there. So whatever this turns out to be, if we found something, then we are going to return the opposite. Okay. If this is true, then we return false. If this is false, we return true, because we're not really returning whether or not we found it. We return whether we added it, and we add it if this is a false condition. Okay, so I know that gets a little confusing. I tell my students that it's kind of like taking a light switch off the wall and then flipping it upside down and putting it back on. So what you think is on is off, and what you think is off is on. But we're basically just switching the logic of that. If we found something, then we're going to return false. If we did not find something, then we're going to return true, because those would be the conditions under which we add. Okay. And then we had our 2-point penalty if by some chance an attempt was made to add to score list inside a for each loop. So again, and you can kind of imagine in your head what's going to happen when we do that with a for each. If we continue to add something to the end, the result is that you end up with a concurrent modification exception. You throw an exception if that happens. Okay, so here are the pitfalls. Here are the potential little places where you might get tripped up a little bit or forget something. And these are going to look pretty similar because, again, they're pretty much the same mistakes, the same little kind of things that we talked about on Tuesday that could happen here and there. You know, first and foremost, forgetting to declare and initialize local variables. You know, if we're going to use local variables, we have to declare them and we have to appropriately initialize them. And that's a common place where you might see a mistake. Loops that contain bounds errors. You know, in this case, we want to make sure that we're going all the way to the end and we stop in the correct spot, but we always want to be aware of our boundary conditions. Are we starting at the beginning? Are we stopping short of the end? You know, it's not uncommon to see a less than or equal to, which is going to throw an exception or some different things like that. So we want to make sure we're checking our loops to make sure we're hitting the appropriate boundary conditions for the problem. This is probably one of the more common. In fact, I just met with my own students today and we talked about this one again, you know, the difference between an array and array list and confusing the ways that we access and update. You know, if I were to go through and say score list and then with square brackets, K, get score, I'm not going to be able to earn the specific point that I'm looking for because we're dealing with an array list and we can't confuse those. So just be careful about the difference between arrays and array lists.
And look at the JQR. Double check your JQR.
Yeah, have the JQR handy so that you have that reference to go back and look at. And then missing brackets. We talked about that one. You know, if by some chance you forget brackets completely, that's an issue. If you just forget one bracket, but you have everything indented appropriately to where there's no confusion and there's no ambiguity for how your code is set up, then that's not so big of an issue. But make sure that you keep brackets in place. Make sure that you're indenting your code appropriately, just in case a bracket gets dropped somewhere. Okay. And then finally, this question specific penalty, and we've already kind of talked about that. If you try and add to score list, if you try and add to your array list inside a for each loop, that's obviously a problem. That's going to cause some errors kind of throughout the points in the rubric. So, okay. Can you think of anything that we need to add to that one?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm trying to think of anything else in there that might trip someone up, but those are really the biggies. Those are the ones that for me personally, I feel like are the most common. I mean, I haven't done any kind of stats or anything, but based on my best recollection in my own classes and from what I've seen in past readings, those seem to be the most common.
And it could be different. Your solution,
Yeah.
We've talked about this again and again, and I know it worries some of you. Your solution could have been a completely different approach, and it still be valid. So don't stress about the fact that yours doesn't look just like this one. That doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Work
okay.
through your...
So let's move on to part B. Now, with 7 points for part A, that only leaves 2 points remaining for part B. So part B is going to be relatively small. So this is it. With part B, we're taking an array of student scores. We have to pull each score and we have to record it in our array list. So this is really all there is to it. We're going to do a for each loop that goes through and gets each score from our student scores, and then we're going to call record with that specific score. So with the 2 points that were on the rubric, do we correctly loop over all of the scores in student scores? We do. This is a good place for a for each loop because we're not changing anything in stu scores. All we're doing is we're just picking each one up and then doing something with it. Okay. And then are we calling the record method that we just wrote in part A using some integer value? We are, and in this case, and it also has to be in the context of the loop, but in this case, we're not only using some int, we're using the appropriate int. We're pulling the score that we pulled from stu scores and we're recording it by calling our record method. So, I mean, that's really all there was to this one. There wasn't much more to part B.
And yours wouldn't look very different. You may have a for loop with a traditional loop, but
yeah, that's
not a lot of variation here. So yours should look pretty similar.
And then again, potential errors, just loops that contain bounds errors, make sure that we stay in bounds, and an incorrect call of the record method. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a way that someone could call record incorrectly, maybe not putting record inside a loop, if you're using it outside of a loop, or if you try and reference stu scores.record. I mean, that would be something that could potentially be thrown in there. The name of the class.record. But again, just kind of keep things simple and keep in mind that because record scores and record are both part of the same class, we don't have to specify an object. We never really got into this dot. I know some college professors teach that, and maybe even some high school teachers. But really, if we're calling it from within the same class, this is perfectly fine. That's all there is to it. Okay. Oh, and again, our missing brackets. That's again a potential for errors. So my students always roll their eyes because that's kind of a hot button with me. Okay, and then this brings us to part C, our open-ended question.
Part C. Okay, so remember what I told you yesterday. Part C is not intended to be stressful to you. If you can write Java code, you can write 2 to 4 sentences about Java code. So approach your open-ended questions with that mentality in the back of your head. Feel confident in your ability to code and therefore your ability to write about code. So what we were thinking, Mr. Schultz and I, when we developed this part C, was we knew that we had the other 2 classes to work from, and we wanted to create a situation where whatever method we wanted to envision needed a new private instance variable back in the score info class. So we first started with the premise of, okay, what could these scores represent? And if you look at the table that we provided, we thought about, and I remember even saying, this could be like we've given the ASVAB test or the SAT or the ACT, even though the numbers are a little bit different, or we've given a Global Scholar test, or whatever kind of test it might be. Your school district has administered that test, and of the score 82, 6 students made an 82 on that test. And so we thought, well, okay, we could look within that 6 students and say, okay, how many of those students were seniors? And so that was our mentality of what we were trying to kind of bring to bear in this open-ended question, so that you would recognize from the table and from the scenario that the programmer would like to add a method to get senior percentage. How many seniors made a particular score, like a subset of a score. And so from that, we hoped that you would determine that, looking at the data that would be brought back from that, if you look at the bottom line of the table, the output would be, hopefully you notice there, the style of that number would be a double. So that will help you with your header, would be, public double get senior percent, and identify within the score info class anything additional that you need. Well, you would need a new private instance variable that would gather an integer to collect the seniors. How many seniors made an 82? How many seniors made a 91? How many seniors made a 79? So we were hoping that you said something for the first bullet to identify, I need a new private instance variable to provide the senior integer number. And then for the third bullet, describe, and remember those verbs, we'll probably review them again at the end. Describe's a little bit heavier than identify. For each new or revised variable, constructor, or method, how would it change or be implemented? So because we added a new private instance variable, num seniors, you would need to just mention that the constructor would need to be updated, or a constructor would need to be updated, and there would need to be a new accessor method added so that we can get to that senior number. So some type of way. You don't have to spell it out, and obviously we don't want you to write code, but we want the verbiage there to recognize, okay, in order to implement this method, I'm going to need a new private instance variable, and therefore there would be a couple of things minimum in that class, score info, that would need to be updated. And we did note here that you did not need to worry about updating record and record scores classes. Those did not need to be kind of brought into bear. There would be a lot of little things that could have happened there, but you don't need to address those. So hopefully those are the things that you wrote about in your response, and you kept it kind of short. I know some of my students, one of them emailed me his responses from my class, and he accidentally started writing code. And that may be what you start doing. You may want to cross that out and then definitely add your sentences, because that's what the reader's going to be looking for. Anything to add, Mr.
Nope.
Schultz?
Nope,
Yeah.
nothing about the question specifically. I think the only thing I was going to add was, after Tuesday, I saw some comments from some teachers asking, where will we see the rubric for the open-ended question, and some things like that. And again, just keep in mind, at this point, there has been no rubric released. I mean, for any of the questions for the exam, the rubric isn't released until after the reading takes place. And at this point, there hasn't even been a sample of a rubric or scoring guidelines for the open-ended question. So for Jill and I to sit here and try and give our best guess at what the rubric might look like, I mean, that would just it would be just that. It would be a guess, which we
even though this is new, it's new for everybody.
Yeah.
So that will all get taken care of, because we're all going to at a level playing field.
Yep, absolutely. So if you leave after this today and go out and start looking for a rubric for this question, my apologies, but you will not find one, because there is not one. We don't have one out there. Okay. Okay, and that brings us to, we're gonna pause a little bit before we get to our second question, and introduce our guest speaker.
She is a computer scientist and mathematician who graduated from Duke University. And you've probably heard of her before.
And if you haven't heard of her, you've probably heard of her husband. Her husband is fairly well known in tech circles. So, so let's hear a little from Melinda Gates.
Hi, I'm Melinda Gates, and I'm so excited to have the chance to drop into your CS class today and let you know how hard I'm rooting for you as you prepare for your exam. I have a feeling that this was not the spring semester you were envisioning, and I know that in addition to this test, you probably have many other things that are on your mind, whether it's your family, your classmates, getting back to school, or what the future of work will look like. But I hope you feel really good about the fact you're choosing to stick with this class, because in some really important ways, the things you're learning here are especially critical right now for the world. We're seeing the world rise to meet this enormous challenge that had been presented by this pandemic, and we've never, as a global community, relied on technology more. Think about the lines of code that are powering disease modeling efforts around the globe. The carefully constructed if-then statements built into the algorithms used by the world's poorest countries to transfer cash directly to their neediest citizens. The data structures that make it possible for a class like this one to move online. Most people look at the world and see only outputs. But none of these things would be possible without people like you supplying the inputs and supplying the code. What I have always loved about computer science, and what I hope you have found too, is that it equips you with a set of skills that you can bring to bear on any problem. And that's great news, because as the world begins to recover and rebuild, we're going to need a whole lot of people with the skills like yours. In the meantime, I wish you the very best of luck on your exam.
Right.
All right. Well, we would definitely like to thank Melinda Gates for her time. I know you may have been expecting a live interview, but I understand that Mrs. Gates' time is very precious, I guess, for lack of a better word, and you know, she obviously has a very busy schedule. So I really appreciate the time, Mrs. Gates, that you took to put that message together for us.
Yeah. Teachers, I hope you were like us and choking back tears listening to that. Students probably weren't. I hope you were inspired and encouraged and feel cheered on, but it's a little sobering to think about the value of being the people that control the input. That's what we know y'all are going to do. All right. Question 2.
So let's move on to question 2. All right, we've got Word Scrambler Part A, the scoring guidelines. So the rubric for Part A for the Word Scrambler question, which was a 15-minute shorter question, a 15-minute question, which is obviously shorter than the first question. We had 4 points. We have to correctly find the middle index of 2 specific words. We have to correctly form the first half of word 1 and the second half of word 2 using the identified index that we can find. And you can still get this point if you are off by 1. The third point, the first half and second half of the word have to be the correct length, with the second half of the odd length word 1 character longer than the first half. For the fourth point, we concatenate and we return the combined string. So we have to put everything together correctly and then return the correctly combined string. So let's take a look at our canonical for this one. And again, this is a fairly brief canonical. You know, the author of this solution put everything into just 1 line of code, and it would be easy to split this apart so that it was a little easier to kind of follow, but this is a perfectly acceptable, very well thought out solution. So looking at our rubric, do we correctly find the middle index of each word? Absolutely. Fairly straightforward. We find the length of a word and we divide by 2. And keep in mind, now we're dealing with strings. So I know it's easy to get confused, but between strings, arrays, and array lists, strings, you have to call a method length. Whereas with an array list, we're used to dealing with size at this point. We've done a lot of array list and size questions. So we're looking at word1.length divided by 2 and word2.length divided by 2. Okay. Do we correctly form the first half of word 1 and the second half of word 2 using the identified index? We do. We take the word 1, we take word 1 substring starting at 0 and up to the halfway point, and then we look at word 2 dot substring using just the halfway point. And remember, with substring, if we use one parameter, it goes from that value to the back of the string, to the back, or the second half. And it does say we can be off by 1. Okay, so if there was maybe an adjustment that was made in there that puts us off by 1, that's okay for this point. However, the third point, the first half and the second half of each word have to be the correct length. In other words, the second half of an odd length word has to be 1 character longer than the first half. And if you think about it, the way Java handles integer division, and if we look at length divided by 2, it pretty much manages itself. If you imagine we have a 5-letter word like index, okay, and I would even suggest having a piece of paper handy so that if you have a question such as this, you can actually test it out. You know, it doesn't have to be a 27-letter word, but you can take a 5-letter word like index. If we take 5 divided by 2 in Java, integer divided by integer gives us 2, which means that our first substring is going to go from 0 up to, but not including 2, which means we'll have position 0 and position 1. So that's a length of 2. For the second half, we would start at position 2 and go all the way to the end. So we'll get index positions 2, 3, and 4. So it automatically kind of manages itself that the second half of an odd length word will be 1 character longer than the first half. I know it's easy to want to try and adjust and add a 1 or subtract a 1 somewhere, but we don't have to. It manages everything all on its own. And then the last point, do we concatenate and return the combined string? And in this case, we take the first half, we concatenate it with a concatenation operator to the second half, and then just automatically return what's there. So even though there are a lot of points packed into this one line of code, this one line of code is sufficient. It does everything we need. Now, I will say this, and I think I mentioned this when we talked about one of the solutions early on. And again, being here at home, time has kind of lost all relevance and meaning. So I don't remember what day it was, but there was a solution that we looked at it was like a hypothetical solution where a student had tried to put everything all in one line. The author of a specific solution tried to put everything in one line. And I believe I said at that point that with my own students, I recommend they don't do that because it's easy. It can be easy to get tripped up over everything that goes in one line and miss things versus breaking things apart a little bit. So, I could see taking this and creating a string variable called first half with our first half of the substring, and then a string variable called second half, so that you're kind of breaking things apart a little bit to make it a little easier. And then at the end, returning first half plus second half. So however you want to do it, just be careful because there are some places in here to get tripped up a little bit with some of those potential errors. I know I've talked about forgetting to declare and initialize local variables. Well, if you do go that route, if you decide you want to create a first half string and a second half string and then concatenate them, we just have to make sure that we actually declare them as string variables. It wouldn't be uncommon to see a student just in the heat of battle say, first half equals word1 dot substring and so on, without putting the word string in front of it to declare it. So we have to be careful about that. Incorrectly identifying the middle index position of an odd length word. I know in my own class, sometimes students tend to overthink things like that. So they think that, okay, well, I have to make sure the second half is 1 character more. So that means I'm going to add 1 word.length plus 1 divided by 2, or word.length divided by 2 minus 1, and they try and adjust for it. So incorrectly identifying that middle index position of an odd length word could be a potential spot. Missing the return statement. Again, that's a common place to see errors. We get so caught up in making sure the algorithm's correct that we forget to actually do something with the answer at the end. So, and of course, missing brackets. I had to throw it in on this last one. So, can you think of anything else that we need to mention?
It's almost so simple that you might have made it more complicated.
Yeah.
This was one, and we picked this question because it was one that dealt with strings, because the other 3 mock questions we had used did not none of them dealt with string.
Yeah.
And so we wanted one that caused you to use string methods from the Java Quick Reference. So, you know, it was nice that it was here in 2014 for us to be able to do that. So, but yeah, it was so easy. I would probably have gone for the three part, you know, make one variable, make another one, then add them together. But lots of my students would, my personal older son, he would have done exactly like this. He's all about, you know, making one long something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I have students that are very, very
what do you call it? Concise,
or they're very stingy with keystrokes, right? It's like they have to pay a nickel every key they hit on the keyboard. So they want to try and do as few keystrokes. Yeah. And if that's the way it works and it looks good, but the main important part is that it does what it's supposed to. So yeah, if you come up with a good working solution, then it's a good working solution. So okay.
All
and
right,
then here's our open-ended question.
This one had a lot of setup, but I just kind of want to go back again and tell you what we were thinking when we set it up and what we wrote it, so that, you know, we built off of part A. Part A, of course, was what you just heard, to take the first two letters of apple and what was it, the last two letters of pear, and come together with APAR. So that's what happened in part A, and that's what we're building from. So we decided to pose to you that we would like to write a method that would determine if a particular recombined combination was valid. And we put valid in italics because, you know, we felt like that was declaring a new definition of the word valid for our purposes of our question. So a valid option, a recombined string, I'm reading from the second sentence at the top. A recombined string was considered valid if its length is less than at least one of the originally paired words. So if APAR comes from apple and pear, and its length is less than one of its originally paired words, being the word apple, then it would be determined to be valid. And then we gave you, I think, another one that would not be considered valid. Actually, it should have been probably recombined word. No. I'm sorry. It's 5 letters too. I was misreading. PEPLE is the same as apple, so it's not less than either one of those. So the next sentence, write a description of how you would implement check valid length so that it returns true if a pair of words is valid. And that's your big clue right there to what kind of method you want to create. So under the what to include in your response, bullet number 1, write the method header. Because we want this method to return true, then you should know that it's got to be a Boolean type method. So that'll help you with bullet number 1. And then bullet number 2, again, identify anything new that you need. And bullet number 3 was another identify any local variables that you would have to create within this new method to help you get the job done. So those were the 3 pieces, I guess you would say. And then if you included in that, write a description of how you would implement it. So, you know, 2 to 4 sentences of how you would write that method. And I think that, you know, envisioning it in your head, if you were able to kind of piece it together, building off part A, this shouldn't have been hard. I hope that you found these, you know, complementary to their parent parts, and that kind of helped you with the open-ended questions on these 2 mock exams. So that's that. So here are our tips about open-ended questions. Again, 2 to 4 sentences. You can use the bullets. Don't forget that above the bullets, the format that we, you know, emulated said write a description, and then it has the bulleted items that we kind of copied.
And one of the things I
Yeah.
shared with my students when we were talking about the same thing today, one of them specifically asked if it provides bullets, do we have to write a paragraph for every single bullet point? And
No,
no, you
please
don't.
do not.
Yeah, they're just meant to be a guide to guide your single paragraph, but you want to make sure that you want to hit each one of those bullet points within your paragraph. So a total of 2 to 4 sentences would probably be sufficient. You know, I kind of forewarned mine that you might need to go a sentence or two beyond that. But like I said yesterday, we're not writing the sequel to War and Peace.
No,
I mean,
it's
this does
technical
not need
writing.
to be pages
Mhm.
and pages of stuff. It's just one brief paragraph. Okay.
Right. Task verbs. Here are the official meanings of identify and describe. Providing a name or an addition as it relates to the problem without elaboration would be identify. And then describe is a little bit more. So add a little bit more to it, give a little bit more detail to go along with your answers.
Yeah. All right, I think that's pretty much everything that we had for today. We have
That's
some
right.
we have some links that College Board provided for us to share with you, and we talked about these a little over the past couple days.
Yep.
The first
I want
4
to talk about my
links.
duck
Oh yeah,
before
we
we
need to
get through.
talk
That's
about your
right.
doc. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. The links at the top take us to my AP and AP Classroom, and then we've got our demo site that hopefully by now every one of you has gone out and been on the demo site multiple times.
Please
If
do
you
that
have
every
not
day.
yet, please make sure you have that. You know, I anticipate that there may be students that have never gotten into the demo site before, that they will end up having problems on exam day because they weren't prepped ahead of time. So please make sure you practice. Don't fall into that trap. Okay. You've got your AP checklist. Make sure that you've taken some time to fill that out so that you're prepped. And then there are some videos. And like I said, I think yesterday or the day before, those are maybe 3 or 4 minutes a piece, if I remember correctly. So take some time and go out and look at those just to make sure there isn't some little morsel of information that you know, maybe you've missed that you might pick up on at that point. And then if you are interested in the released 2020 exam sample questions that were released by College Board on Monday, the actual address to get to them is clear down here at the bottom, apcoronavirusupdates.collegebboard.org/students/taking the exam with dashes /computer science A.
And
But if,
that's
oh, go ahead.
Gizmo and check digit.
Yes, yeah, including the sample open-ended questions
That's
that
right.
were released by College Board. But we've also been told that you can get to them directly through AP Central if you go to the AP Coronavirus Updates link. But then you have to kind of go down and search for it a little bit from there. So on the AP Coronavirus Updates, you would go to For AP Students and click the Information for Students link. And then from that page, you would click Taking the Exams and click the Learn More link. On that page, in the very first paragraph, you're going to see a link that says online free response exams for each course. And then from that page, then you would go all the way down to math and computer science and click CSA. And that's where you will find the released 2020 exam sample questions, as well as all of the other exam information that you might need. Okay.
True.
And let's see.
5 steps.
Yep, we have 5 steps that College Board is suggesting. Make sure you try the exam demo, complete the exam day checklist, confirm your email address, make sure you have your e-ticket. Hopefully everybody received the confirmation on Monday, and if not, make sure you go back and confirm your email address. Remember that if by some chance you're not getting the emails, you can also get to your e-ticket on My AP. And definitely don't forget to check in 30 minutes early. Okay, so these are all of the things that you need to do before the exam even starts. Okay.
Yeah.
What are we forgetting besides your duck?
Nothing. So my duck, I was trying to think about a way. We're going to do one kind of fun thing tomorrow. Tomorrow's our last day together, which is just kind of crazy to think about. It's also strange to think about. We've been together for 6 weeks. So
Oh my gosh.
who knew that 2020 would be like this? It's
Wow.
been a blessing. But anyway, I was trying to think today about what can we do that would kind of help us remember our time together. And one of the things sometimes I do in my class if we have an odd day is I make origami. So I don't know if I need to grab the screen. I can if I need to, but
Oh, here, I can
that
just
big
stop
enough?
sharing.
I don't know if it's
I'll
worth
just
it.
stop the share. Yeah, go for it.
As much effort as it took me to am I
Well,
there?
no, I think, yeah, I think you,
Okay.
yeah, you've got the full screen.
So I took a Java quick reference page that I had printed a while back and folded it into this Origami Duck. And mainly because a lot of you have rubber ducks with your teachers, and we use rubber ducks when we did something one day. And so I thought, well, that'd be kind of fun. Yeah, you've got your rubber duck. Mr. Schultz is holding up. So find some code that you wrote that maybe you were going to throw in the garbage can, or if you have 2 copies of the checklist, or if you have 2 copies of the JQR. And I put the YouTube that I copied off of on in our folder. And what I did on the inside of my duck's wing is I hope that's in the right direction for you all.
Yep, you got it.
I put the date, and I'm going to keep it to just remember all of our time together. But the beak was the weirdest part to fold, and it's kind of janky, but that's okay. But I thought that it might be fun for y'all to make one of these to just keep on your desk. And when you're taking your exam and you see your duck, please think about me and Rob, and think about the fact that we are going to be, I'm going to start crying. We're going to be thinking about you all day long on the 15th. So I'll never make it tomorrow. I'll start crying the whole day. But we're going to be thinking about you all day long on May the 15th. We'll cover all time zones. We'll cover all time zones from whenever people start to whenever people finish. But and if origami gives you, like stress, I know sometimes when I'll mention origami in my classroom, some people have like, oh my gosh, we did that in Richmond in middle school, and I'm not good at that. So don't do something that's stressful. Write on a sticky note, Jill and Rob are thinking about me and sending me all good, happy thoughts. So anyway, that's that. So that's all I have to say, except for your instructions are there. Don't fold up your JQR unless you have 2 of them, because you're going to need it on your test. But you could do your exam day checklist if you're printed 2 of those, or a sheet of code or something. So anyway.
Well, that's all we have for today. We definitely want to thank Melinda Gates for taking the time to share some words of encouragement with you, and for supporting this program. We appreciate, we appreciate her contribution today, and the things that she had to say. And
we will be here tomorrow. We hope that you come back tomorrow.
Yep, come back tomorrow. We've got something fun and kind of special planned, so come back for the last day.
And I'll probably cry, so you can come watch that.
Too.
So that's okay.
I had my last class with my last official class with 2 of my classes of seniors today.
Oh, we're going to bring Bo and JJ to class tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm going to try and get JJ
coming back for.
Here. That'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, I'll have to move my laptop to the floor because he weighs 60 pounds, so it's going to be hard to get him into my chair with me.
Yeah.
He would love to sit in my lap. He doesn't know he weighs 60 pounds. So anyway, all right, that'll keep me from crying. I'll be aggravated at Bo. So.
All right. Well, everybody have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.